warm welcome. On behalf of the Scientific Committee of the International Conference of Dalcroze Studies, I wish you a very warm welcome, and especially those attending the ICDS for the first time. It is good to be together, even though we are not physically in the same space. Welcome to our 3 keynote speakers, to the members of the Scientific Committee, to the regional coordinators and monitors, to presenters, chairs and delegates, and to the students, who make up 20% of nearly 350 participants. A special welcome to our guest of honour, Helga Neira-Tsugasti. Helga is a rhythmics practitioner and researcher who has worked with children with learning disabilities for more than 4 decades. You will learn more about Helga's work tomorrow when we present her with the ICDS Lifetime Achievement Award. Our theme is Dalcroze practice in diverse cultures, communities and contexts. We want to investigate and reflect on and celebrate the wide diversity of Dalcroze and closely related practices. These practices continually evolve, often in response to global health and social challenges such as inclusion and healthy aging. There are always fresh perspectives to explore, and this is one of the functions of the ICDS. We meet against the backdrop of a global pandemic. However you may have been affected, and whatever your educational or professional background, I warmly invite you to participate fully in ICDS5. Please join us in the spirit of collaborative reflection that the conference offers. The programme, as you will have seen, is rich, and the presentations are varied in terms of topic, discipline and format. We hope you will find a satisfying path through all this variety. As usual, we have keynote presentations to light our way, and their role is to inspire and challenge us in our practice, reflection and research. Shortly, I will invite Nicholas, Catherine and Liesel to say a few words. The fact we are holding a conference at all is a sign of remarkable resilience in the face of very challenging circumstances. During the closing ceremony of ICDS4 in Katowice, Poland, we celebrated a fresh collaboration with our colleagues in the Jacques Dalcroze Society of Japan. Only a few months later, the world was turned upside down as COVID-19 began to spread internationally and all of our lives changed. After initially postponing the 5th conference, we were eventually forced to cancel it due to the continued disruption and insecurity caused by the pandemic. It was not long, however, before the Scientific Committee began to ask, why not try an online event? We hoped this might not only help to keep the ICDS community connected, but might also help to expand it. And as we welcome a record number of delegates to this conference, both have proved to be the case. Vision has become reality. We know that an online format is not ideal. However, we also know that digital connection can be better than no connection. It has also provided access to those who might not otherwise be able to participate. Virtual gatherings also have benefits for the environment and our personal finances. So presenting ICDS5 online has brought solutions as well as challenges. One solution we are using for socializing is Wonder. Please do make use of the ICDS5 Wonder Room during the breaks. I look forward to meeting some of you there. If we were meeting in person, we would by now have greeted our colleagues in the spaces outside the main hall. We would have embraced, shaken hands, introduced ourselves to each other. We cannot do that today. But by the wonder of Zoom technology, we do have breakout rooms, and we have breakouts coming up shortly. Please join your breakout room to say hello to some of your conference fellow delegates. Before that, however, some thanks. First, ICDS5 is benefiting especially from the support of a large number of volunteers who are monitoring the Zoom sessions. For their commitment and support, we thank Veronika Balewski, Zita Bucher, Pei Chen Chen, Arlene Chung, Cindy Fox, Jerison Harper-Lee, Veronika Jarzinska, Anna Kokoczynska, Charlotte Leng, Anna Lipietz, Joy Mayer, Laura Ono, Rosalind Ridout, and Emma Shubin. Their work has been superbly managed by Alexander Riedmüller, Catherine Smith, Stephen Neely, and Andrew Goldman. And Andrew has also managed this entire operation in addition to being secretary to the scientific committee. We are enormously grateful to him and all his team. Agatha Chapinska is another star. Thanks to her for her very hard work as the ICDS Marketing and Communications Officer and the ICDS5 Administrator. Thanks to our sponsors, the Association des Amis de Jacques Dalcroze and the Fondation Émile Jacques Dalcroze, and to all those who donated to the conference. ICDS5 has been the most financially accessible conference we have ever held. Our gratitude goes to all those who helped to publicize the conference as well, and their details are on page 12 of the program. Thanks also to Emma Shubin and Veronika Bolewski at Integral Steps for their care and professionalism in handling the financial transactions of ICDS5. As ever, the Scientific Committee has been a constant source of advice and support. Thank you to Ruth Alperson, Eric Barnhill, Andrew Goldman, Karen Greenhead, Leena-Juntunen, Johanna Larkonen, Louise Mathieu, Luke Nice, Andrea Schiavio, and Liesl van der Merwe. I would also like to thank Jane Southcott, who stepped down from the committee in April 2021, for her contribution to ICDS since before the first conference, and for help with peer review thanks to Sandra Nash and Selma Odom. Last but not least, thanks to my wife Bethan for everything. Diolch yn fawr, cariad. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Andrew now, and this is our time for some interaction in the breakout rooms. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so I will put everyone into a breakout room. Stand by. Should be able to join your breakout room now. And greetings to those who have just joined us. We've just opened breakout rooms to greet our fellow conference delegates. So if you just joined us, I will put you into a breakout room if you stand by. Or in fact, the purpose of the breakout rooms was to meet our fellow delegates. So we're all here right now. We can meet each other. That might be logistically easier. So it's nice to see all of you. Let's see. You're welcome to unmute yourself and turn on your camera and say hello if you'd like.
Hi there, nice to see everyone.
Hello. Alex, hello. How are you doing, Alex?
Thank you. If this session is the one we are going to see in the recording afterwards, I guess so. Yeah, but still people are joining. It's wonderful. Hi, Rosalind.
My breakout room didn't really happen, so I thought I'd return.
It didn't happen.
There was one person who had internet troubles and one person who didn't seem to be there.
Uh-oh.
Never mind.
It's early in the morning, like at many places of people joining, I think.
Oh. Maybe I'll go and join another room. Can I can do that as co. Can I go and do that?
I think you can do everything, anything you like, Rosalind.
Oh, maybe I will, maybe I won't.
That's the advantage of being one of the monitors. We can in and out where we want to.
It's quite stressful, actually, isn't it? Doing the monitoring, especially when people are unmuted. Yeah, Alex, I'm confused about the muting thing because I was muted when I entered, but some people clearly weren't.
I think you have the option to enter muted or not. Am I right?
Maybe.
Yeah, but we can change it so that when people enter, that they are muted. Of course, now you don't have to be muted, so everybody just listening to us, you can unmute yourself because this is socializing time.
If you just joined, we're for these 5 minutes, we're just saying hello to people. So you're welcome to unmute or turn on your video and say hello. It's nice to meet you all. It's nice to see you all.
Hi, Katarzyna.
Hello. Hey, hello, nice to see you, everyone. Sorry, I had some trouble with my computer camera, so I switched into iPhone, which is like a reliable device, always the phone. So I'm very sorry for this little interrupt before. How are you guys?
Nice to see you. Good, I'm fine. How are you?
Okay, quite good. I'm happy to be here even via Zoom, but what can we do?
So Alex, in just a minute here, I'll close all the rooms. Ross.
Okay. I just found the muting while joining function as well.
Hello.
Hello, Ginta. Nice to see you.
Yeah, me too.
How are you?
Very good.
Rosalind, are you in Manchester?
No, I live in London, actually.
Oh, you live in London,
I
okay.
know, and I haven't been to Manchester for about a year and a half. You've known me 2 years, yeah.
Oh, right.
Time to go soon.
I'm going to close all of the rooms. It'll take a moment for everyone to come back, but I think it's time. So. Okay, breakout rooms will close in 60 seconds. I don't know if you see the same controls that I see. So. Welcome back to the main room, everyone. Just wait one moment while everyone returns.
Okay.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope that was.
Recording in progress.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope that
Recording in
was.
progress.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope that was. Welcome back, everybody. I hope that was. Welcome back, everybody. I hope that was. Welcome back, everybody. I hope that was a nice moment of social interaction for you there. And I'm going to hand over straight to Paul Hiller, who's going to help us with a warm-up. Thank you, Paul.
Hello, so yeah, a little warm up. This means we are sitting in front of the computer, and I would like to encourage you, if you can, to stand up and just to do a little bit of movement with me and to enjoy our bodies and to relax our eyes and our ears. So we just move our shoulders in circles, please. And also the other way around, in counter direction. And we can move also the whole of our arms together with the shoulders. And our hips too. And the spine. And we can just jump a little bit. If not, you can sit and do it with your hands. Okay, good. And we massage a little bit our jaws. Yeah? Our face. Just to get rid a little bit of tension. That is very normal if you are sitting in front of a screen. Okay. Very nice. And your ears. And I would like you to stand on both feet or to sit on your sitting bones and be as upright as it can be and move a little bit in a very small spiral to a center. And you can do this if you stand like this. Okay. And relax, we relax our eyes and our ears, and you close your eyes, you just listen. I close my eyes too, and just relax the eyeballs. And try to relax your ears. We can start with one ear, the left ear. There is the outer ear and the hearing canal up to our little eardrum, our little percussion instrument in the left ear. And with the left ear, you just relax again your facial muscles. And behind the eardrum are the three very, very small bones of the middle ear. Just relax them too. Thinking of our jaws again, to let them fall, let it fall. And the right side too, the outer ear, the listening canal and the eardrum on the right side. Also the three little bones of the middle ear. And again the whole head, the jaw, the ears. The facial muscles, the eyes. And now try to listen around yourself in your room, in your space, in your real space, what you hear. also go from one side to the other, from the left side to the front and to the right side and to our back. Just switch a little bit our intention, our attention of the space around us. Also, we can listen upwards and downwards. The whole ball of air around us and in us. And we can also try to observe the way the air goes into our mouth, our nose, our throat. Be aware of our breathing. And try to find a connection between the outer world, the listening of the outer room, space, world, and your inner body. And I was thinking this could also be a little moment of thought of all the teachers that we were connected with, and especially the ones that brought eurythmics and Dalcroze to us. Like the people I studied with, they still are my friends. Who brought you to these methods? Some names are popping up in my head. Our community, the connection to all of us, even if we don't know the people we will meet, our movement. Yeah, and then we can stretch, open our eyes slowly. Oh, and make some breathing noise. Phew. Okay, and that would be my part for today. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Paul. And if I could just ask Nicholas Rowe just to introduce himself and say a few words. Thanks, Nicholas.
Hi, sorry, I just, because I've got a share screen, I didn't have the space. I had to go and turn the camera off and go and find a space to do all that movement. And I came running back across the room to dive in, get the camera on. John, why did you have to make me go first? Anyway, so thank you for throwing me into that. Thank you for those exercises though first, Paul. That was a really wonderful start. And especially anyone who's been teaching or doing anything on Zoom for hours every day knows how beautiful it is, or sitting in meetings, how lovely it is to have an opportunity to get up and move. Thank you. Well, look, I'm going to talk all about myself in a little while now, so I'm not going to say too much about me now. I do want to say thank you very much for those breakout rooms. We do have this, totalitarian regime called Zoom, and it can foster a really totalitarian system because we can get very conformed into it, and it can be very hard to find each other's differences. I'm very inspired by the words of Hannah Arendt, who says we need to maintain the strangeness of each other in the public sphere. How do we find that strangeness and keep that alive, keep those differences when Zoom can make everybody seem very beige or retreat us into very common kind of spaces? So I'm looking forward through this conference to finding spaces in which we can really reach in and touch and feel that that sense of difference, as well as all of the things that we're going to be talking about in common. But that's enough from me. Thank you very much, John. Passing on.
Thank you, Nicholas. And could I ask Catherine, please, just to introduce herself?
Hello, I'm Catherine Kaye, and I live on the south coast of England in the UK, just about a 5 minutes walk to the sea that way. And I've been using Dalcroze principles in my teaching for nearly 25 years. Currently, I teach different groups of children for the Royal College of Music in London through their outreach work, as well as within the junior programmes. The title of my keynote is Music, Movement and Magic, and I'll be sharing some exercises and pedagogy of how I try to keep the joy and music right at the centre of my classes, whether online or in person. I'd like to invite you to bring a brightly coloured object, so a ball, a soft toy, a washing up glove, a duster, I don't mind, as long as it's quite fun and vibrant. And I look forward to seeing you later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And now, Liesel, please.
Good day, my name is Liesel van der Merwe. I'm from Northwest University in sunny South Africa. My roles include being a music educator, researcher, bassoon teacher, conductor, and community musician in the School of Music. I'm part of Masara, a research group studying music and well-being. I look forward to ICDS5 to learn how people creatively adapted their practice during the pandemic. I'm also interested in Dalcroze well-being applications in diverse communities. On Saturday, tomorrow, I will share with you how joy in Dalcroze Eurythmics work and what it affords. I'm excited that joy motivates us and moves us to do what matters most to us. I believe joyful experiences in Dalcroze Eurythmics can promote social well-being and social cohesion.
Thank you, Liesel. And as some of you will know, it's a tradition at ICDS that the conference is a real mixture of research and practice and performance. And we wanted to bring the artistic side of rhythmics practice into our opening with just a short piece by Claudia Orvovska. And I'm just going to ask Claudia now just to say a very brief word of introduction. Claudia, over to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Breathing is a short piece in which movement meets the breath. Word breath in Polish is often compared with words gasp and soul. Combining of those helps to see in breathing not only physiological function. Breathing as an unconditional process sometimes goes unnoticed, but still it is crucial to our living. While composing music and movement, breath becomes to me a main source of inspiration to take creative actions. Breath become a guide for movement sequences and figures. Influence of these two lets the performer to explore new quality in movement and look into himself in the same time. In my piece, I was trying to display the relation between breath and body, and also focus your attention on how unbreakable the bond between them is. So enjoy breathing.
Buddy, I'm very sorry to interrupt, but I don't know if the sound came through.
Andrew, I'll try that again. My apologies.
Oh, I see. Oh, John, you're controlling. Okay, good.
Thank you very much, Claudia. And now to Andrew, in case there are any announcements. Andrew?
Thank you, John. It's so wonderful to be with all of you after all of the planning. I've been in touch with many of you, but it's nice to see many more of you today. Just a few reminders. If you have a technical question, the best way to ask it is in the chat to the monitors. So you'll see in the chat that there are some people named like Red.B, ICDS Alexander, or Rosalind. In any session you go to in the conference, you can ask questions to the monitor about anything technical related to the conference. Please look at the schedule carefully to make sure that you understand when the sessions begin and end. We've made a video to help you understand the schedule and how to navigate the program. I'll put that in the chat so that you can see the video there if you haven't already watched it. We also produced some instructions for delegates, which you may find helpful. If you haven't already looked through them, please do. I just put that in the chat as well. So there's a video and a document with instructions on how to join the appropriate meetings at the conference. If you haven't already looked at those materials, please do. We don't want you to get the time wrong and miss your session. So please look through those materials. To ask a question during question and answer periods during the conference, just remember you can either raise your digital hand, which is in the reactions option in Zoom, or you can write in the chat preceding your question, put a Q. So I'll give an example, just put a Q and then your question. Okay. And also, it's possible to use a live transcript option with Zoom. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom window, there should be a CC live transcript option. If you turn that on, then you will see text at the bottom of your screen that is printing the text of the words that are being spoken in real time. It's a nice piece of technology. And finally, if you're not speaking please keep yourself muted. And we also, you know, if possible, prefer for videos to be on to provide for a better conference experience, but you don't have to have them on if you're not able. All right, finally, there's a few cancellations. We announced this over email, but I just want to remind you. Workshop S19, Chapinska, that's the October 22 Red A2 session has been canceled. I will put that in the chat. The paper S55 by Meyer, which is the October 22 session, Green B1 session has been canceled. I'll put that in the chat. Greenhead paper S46 in the October 22 Blue B3 session has been canceled. I will put that in the chat. And finally, Boguslavska workshop S81, which is the October 22 Green B3 session, has also been canceled. So those 4 have been canceled, just so that you know. That's a lot of information. It's all in the chat. That's all from me. Thank you and have a great conference.
Thanks very much, Andrew. So it's just remains for me to say it's been my privilege once again to chair the scientific committee of the ICDS, and on their behalf, I wish you a very fulfilling and enjoyable conference experience. I hope you will relish it, make new contacts, and come away with fresh inspiration for your work. I now declare the 5th International Conference of Dalcroze Studies open, and I'll hand over to Marja. And just to say, although we're starting Nicholas's keynote late, we will use some of the break time to make sure that he gets his full hour. Thank you for your attention and enjoy the conference.
Thank you, John, and good morning, day or evening, everyone from Helsinki. I have a great pleasure and an honor to present our first keynote. Dr. Nicholas Rowe is Professor of Dance Studies at the University of Auckland, New Zealand, and UNESCO Chair in Dance and Social Inclusion. He is graduate of the Australian Ballet School and holds a PhD from the London Contemporary Dance School, University of Kent at Canterbury. Nicholas Rowe is both a performing artist, a scholar, and an activist, if I may say so. He has an international career as a ballet dancer and choreographer. From 2000 till 2008, he resided in the occupied Palestinian territories, working in refugee camps on dance projects with local artists, and he continues to maintain an active practice as a community dance animator in diverse regions of the world. Professor Rowe has published extensively on dance, creativity, collaboration, and education in diverse cultural contexts. He gives regular public talks on the relationship between dance, communities, and political context, with a particular focus on cultural hegemony and appropriation. I have a pleasure to know him personally through the Finnish Arts Equal Research Initiative, where he worked as an international partner. So the title for his keynote today is The Role of Performing Arts Teachers in an Era of Forced Migration. So Nicholas, it's wonderful to have you with us. And please, the Zoom floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marja, and thank you very much, John and the conference committee for inviting me to present at this conference. I'm very honored by this opportunity. I'm very sorrowful that we couldn't follow our the original plans of meeting all together in Tokyo, but nevertheless, I'm very proud that the conference committee decided to go forward and take the brave step of organizing this all online. And clearly that's been a very good decision, because the strength of the delegates and the diversity of places everyone is coming from shows that there's still an urgent need for us to gather together, share ideas, and respond to each other's ideas. So tonight, I want to talk a bit about the future and saying, looking forward, what are the competencies will teachers of the performing arts, what will they require? This evening, I'd like to draw attention to, or it's evening here, sorry, I should point out, I'm in Auckland in New Zealand, where it's quite late in the evening. It's just after 7:40. I'm As I mentioned to the others in my breakout room, I'm yet to have a glass of wine, even though it's Friday night. So you should be very proud of me for waiting out this long. And hopefully I'll get through the rest of today's presentation without reaching over for a glass. But if any of you want to, by all means, no matter what time of day it is, feel free to have a glass of wine throughout this presentation. It may help you. But this evening here, or wherever you are, whatever part of the day it is, I'd like to draw attention to the increasingly significant role of performing arts teachers as agents of cultural integration. I want to ask questions about how can arts teachers and performing arts teachers become a catalyst of cultural pluralism within ever diversifying societies, and what's that going to take? I'm just going to go to a share screen now and pull up a brief PowerPoint, which I'll work through. Now, within that, yes, I've been introduced. I'm situated at the University of Auckland. I currently hold the inaugural UNESCO Chair in Dance and Social Inclusion, and the purpose and the fundamental goal of establishing this UNESCO Chair has to been to bring a greater attention towards the idea of what is the role of dance within the fostering of social inclusion. Now, my research really likes to look at the role of the performing arts teacher. And in this, I'm very much building on the work of Gert Biester, who is questioning how can we challenge the learnification of education. That is, the shifts and transformation amongst very progressive educational processes that are making and centering everything being totally about the learner. And this questioning isn't from a conservative traditionalist desire to return back to a very authoritarian role for the performing arts teacher, but it is about questioning what is the role and relationships of the person who is doing the education, and what is their purpose within that. Within that, I follow Gert Biester's questioning of, well, what are the purposes, relationships, and knowledge of a teacher, but I consider it particularly in the context of as a performing arts teacher. Once we understand what those purposes and relationships and knowledges within the current era of what they might be, we need to look at them. What are the competencies that performing arts teachers are going to need going forward? And that's really going to be the focus of my discussion today. I recognize I'm not coming from within Delacroix studies. I'm a bit of an alien in this gathering, and I hope you'll forgive my transgressions if I do not always capture the right expression or reference to what is being honored in this conference, which is Delacroix studies. But hopefully still from this point of difference, from this point of being outside of that space, I'll be able to bring in some provocations for you all to consider. A bit about myself first. As Maria Elena mentioned, I've had quite a diverse and complex career. I began as a classical performer and then as a contemporary dancer in different dance companies across Europe and Australasia. I've also spent considerable amount of time working in communities. I was for 8 years, from 2000 to 2008, in the West Bank in Gaza Strip and in South Lebanon, running arts education projects in refugee camps. And that's where I undertook my PhD and really engaged in the function of arts education and dance within traumatized communities. In approaching this and approaching my research into what it is to be a dance educator or a dance teacher, I've worked in different research modalities. I've engaged in historical and archival research, ethnographic research, gathering the stories and experiences and phenomenological encounters that dance teachers and learners have. I've engaged in my own community animation practice and engaged in action research projects associated with that, and also fundamentally within creative practice modalities, particularly in the development of dance films and looking at what is it to be engaging in dance filmmaking within traumatized communities. Through this research process and these diverse modalities has really pushed me into the zone of understanding the significance and the importance of transdisciplinary research. Now, transdisciplinarity is a growing phenomenon that many of you will be familiar with within research, and it entails research, education, and action that's on addressing significant societal challenges. And it requires collaborative processes of engagement that go beyond academic boundaries, that is working together with stakeholders and not just within specific disciplinary areas. And the goal of this research is to have a transformative outcome. It's now being very firmly led by the OECD and other policy and governance bodies around the world that are emphasizing that if we are to address the wicked problems, the huge social challenges that are emerging from climate change and pandemics and such, inequity, political discord, we really need to be engaging in a transdisciplinary research approach. And that is looking at how can we go beyond our disciplinary zones without necessarily losing those disciplinary values, but looking at how engagement with different disciplinary areas can really enrich and expand those conversations and the responses. Also, fundamentally, how can we, from the outset of any research project, engage with the end users, the stakeholders, the people who will be most affected by that research and its outcomes. Now, I recognize, having read through the program of this conference, that already there's quite a lot happening in transdisciplinary research in Dalcroze studies. Probably foremost amongst that is in the zone of mental and physical well-being. And how is Dalcroze studies addressing these issues, sometimes in tandem, sometimes still within the isolated space of a Dalcroze researcher, but sometimes in tandem with other disciplines. It's also looking at what education means, and there's transdisciplinary research in Dalcroze studies also looking at socio-political inclusion. It's in this latter area that I'm really going to focus in today's presentation. And looking at, well, how can we engage in a really transdisciplinary approach to understanding some key fundamental, huge global societal challenges that we have moving forward. Now, to do this, I'm going to be asking questions of what does arts education research have to offer these global societal challenges? But in doing that, in order to offer anything to the global societal challenges, we also need to at first acknowledge that those societal challenges exist and that they are meaningful and worthy of paying attention to. So how might we now, within our arts education research, further acknowledge that these global societal challenges are there? And then from that, I'm going to focus particularly on one very significant global societal challenge, and that is the issue of mass forced migration. And how does this mass forced migration impact on the purposes and possibilities of arts education? And how might arts education research respond to and address some of the societal challenges emerging from mass forced migration? Let me go pull back now from doing PowerPoint, because otherwise we'll all get very bored of looking at images. You're no doubt going to get very bored of looking at my face as well, but to be honest, I just didn't get enough time to put it all on PowerPoint. So I'm going to swing back to just talking to you directly from here. I hope you'll forgive that. But going further into this issue of how can dance and music and drama and the teaching and educating of these practices address these global challenges? Well, first of all, we have to acknowledge that we know that education in dance, drama, and music does not solely exist to prepare individuals for a career on the stage. Performing arts education can provide learners with valued attributes such as creativity, criticality, collaboration, and communication, supporting their future employment within a knowledge economy. Performing arts education has also been rationalized as an important means of engaging and motivating learners, and of fostering a greater sense of connection to culture and belonging within a community. This process of community construction through arts education is particularly important for a world that is in crisis and seeking transformation. Educational activities in the performing arts provide individuals and communities with a reflective space and a political mandate to creatively and critically interact with each other in a way that also offers an aesthetic experience. Through these sensually enlivening interactions, learners can reimagine the world around them, conceptually offering questions and solutions in a way that might also be viscerally enjoyed as a fantasy. Through this ambiguous blending of a real world and with an unreal world, Artistic performance activities can reveal impending risks, alternate viewpoints, and latent possibilities. Now, successive arts education policies have recognized this potential for arts education to provoke collective reflection and generate new conceptualizations of society. The 2011 UNESCO Seoul Agenda for Arts Education emphasized the need, and I quote here, to apply arts education principles and practices to contributing to resolving the social and cultural challenges facing today's world. Now, to understand the significance of this mandate for the teaching identities of performing arts teachers, it's important to distinguish these two types of challenges, social and cultural. How has arts education been used to address these very differing challenges? Well, the ways that arts education addresses social challenges is sometimes understood as a very passive form of public pedagogy. This can include awareness campaigns that use arts to educate a public in order to shift societal attitudes and behaviors related to health or education or democratic participation and other civic issues. Socially transformative arts education is also understood as a more active educational process, one that engages stakeholder groups in creative and critical learning activities that can address civic concerns such as peace, reconciliation, justice, equality, and environmental responsibility. These socially transformative arts education processes have engaged the animation practices of dance and drama and music teachers within diverse performance frameworks that allow for collaborative participation, such as forum theatre or site-specific dance and community choirs. When effective, these teachers of performing arts transform a crowd into a community. Arts teachers can activate the collective curiosity and social capital of a group of strangers through meaningful, collaborative, and aesthetic experiences. But what about cultural challenges? The ways that arts education addresses cultural challenges can be very aligned with the animated processes of social transformation. But cultural challenges are nevertheless a separate phenomenon that requires further clarification. Firstly, we need to determine what a specific cultural challenge might be. This is it's a highly contentious issue. Early UNESCO arts education policies sought to employ arts education as a mechanism to support the safeguarding and maintenance of intangible cultural heritage. This emerged out of a concern for communities that were perceived as vulnerable to cultural hegemony and appropriation. Politically conservative, ethno-nationalist political movements have also sought to use arts education for cultural revival. Arts education revivalists have argued that the disappearance of former cultural practices is symptomatic of the loss of a more exclusive historic community associated with a particular place and history. Those that consider cultural challenges as problems that require maintaining or reviving, they might generally engage in an educational purpose that is very content-centered. That is, the role of the teacher in such a context can be to ensure the effective transmission of an established canon of knowledge to students. The challenge of cultural integration presents a significant contrast to these challenges of cultural maintenance and cultural revival in both political ideology and educational purpose. Politically, cultural integration seeks to achieve an inclusive and pluralist society through ongoing processes of cultural hybridization. In terms of educational purpose, cultural integration encourages learners to bring increasingly diverse cultural influences into a classroom, with the expectation that those cultural influences might form a basis of knowledge that is shared and expanded by all of those involved in education. Now, fostering such cultural integration amongst this culturally diverse group of learners can therefore require more than just an expanded curriculum. It can demand an expanded conceptualization of teaching identity. And that's what I want to really talk about today, this expanded conceptualization of teaching identity. A performing arts teacher's purpose when leading artistic interactions towards cultural integration is not simply a socializing enterprise. Cultural integration can require pedagogic skills and dispositions that extend beyond socially transformative pedagogies and extend well beyond the historic expectations of dance, drama, and music teachers. For a society to be actively inclusive, it needs to value cultural pluralism and diversity. A performing arts teacher seeking to contribute to such a society continually needs, therefore, to critically and creatively reflect on how culture is being valued. So, why is this all such an urgent matter? Well, people are moving faster than ever before, and not by choice. And I'm talking about movement here not as dancers, but from their homes and places of location. The United Nations estimates that currently more than 79 million people around the world have been forcibly displaced as a result of political, economic, and environmental catastrophes. Every 2 seconds, another person is removed from their home. This means that since I began this speech, approximately 450 individuals have been set upon the road. Of these, around 41%, or 184 people, will be under the age of 18. Now, this is a big statistic. Sometimes it's easier to visualize this. We could consider these 184 people under the age of 18 as approximately 7 classrooms of high school students. Now, by the time I finish this speech, that number will have grown to approximately 25 classrooms of young people that cannot return to their childhood homes. Most of these young people will remain internally displaced within their own national borders or continue into neighboring non-OECD countries such as Turkey and Colombia. These non-OECD countries have received more than 80% of the world's international asylum seekers in the last 10 years. The forced migration of people has nevertheless become an increasingly global phenomenon, leading to the rapidly growing influx of asylum seekers into Europe and North America, and the polarizing political movements that have accompanied it. From the building of the border wall between the US and Mexico to the abandonment of migrant boats in the Mediterranean Sea, the contemporary socio-political responses to this migration have directly challenged the humanist values and policies that were established following the atrocities of the Second World War. Now, if we think that things have changed hugely now, just in the last 10 years towards how politics is facing this mass migration, we need to look a bit further ahead. This mass migration looks certain to rise much further. As a result of the natural, economic, and political disasters associated with climate change, the UN estimates that by the year 2050, there may be up to 1 billion climate refugees globally, or that's 1 in every 9 persons. These people will be drawn from very diverse parts of the world. We need to think of this as not just non-OECD countries, but everywhere, within every country. When coupled with ongoing population growth, this will present significant tensions on ever-shrinking natural resources. Now, unless countries adopt even more odious policies of exclusion than they have already done, through this migration, we might anticipate that our cities will continue to expand in both population density and cultural diversity. In 10 years' time, the cultural demographics of learners in our classrooms will therefore appear significantly different than they did 10 years ago. How might this present expectations and choices for education and for the role of the teacher? Well, to understand this, we need to consider the phenomenon of acculturation. Acculturation is the coming together of different cultural values and practices. It is very common throughout history. Cultural groups have regularly migrated into new regions and encountered different cultural groups. The way that different cultural groups have subsequently inhabited the same geographic space has been very diverse. The relationships between these people, these different groups, might be considered a biopolitical process. That is, it inevitably relates to the distribution of power between and amongst these different groups. To understand how this power works, we might consider three common outcomes of acculturation as assimilation, separation, and integration. They often blur with each other, so that these three outcomes might be considered as idealized points on an acculturation spectrum, rather than simply firmly distinct categories of cultural order. It can nevertheless be very useful to unpack the significance of these three idealized points. So within this speech, we're going to focus on what are the implications of assimilation, separation, and integration on education, and on a performing arts teacher's sense of purpose. Well, to achieve assimilation, one cultural group is required to forsake their former cultural practices and adopt the cultural practices of another cultural group. In order to share that same geographic location, this group must fit in with the other group's culture. This adaptation can occur casually, such as when members of a cultural group learn the language of another cultural group in order to gain access to institutions and marketplaces. Assimilation can also involve a more deliberate hegemonic process in which governance bodies exert control over a culturally diversifying population. Formal education inevitably plays a significant part in this more deliberate assimilation process. Education becomes a cross-cultural tool that can slowly conform a new generation into the cultural values and practices of a politically dominant group. Such teaching and learning may be part of a legally enforced policy of assimilation. We can see this amongst the stolen generation of Indigenous Australia, in which Aboriginal children were forcibly removed from homes and into institutions to become more like the white culture. We can also see it through less overt means, such as forbidding the Indigenous Maori children of New Zealand from speaking Te Reo, the Maori language, within schools. Now, assimilation processes have been very strongly promoted as a way of supporting a nation's unity. This outcome of acculturation, however, can be very disempowering for particular cultural groups and individuals. They can be required to forsake their own cultural capital and begin the process of accruing the cultural capital of a dominant group. Now, assimilation isn't the only way, even though it's been very common. There are other ways in which cultural groups interact when they meet. We can see an alternate method of addressing acculturation is separation. This involves the partitioning of social and cultural practices between different cultural and ethnic groups who are inhabiting the same geographic space. Through separation, these cultural groups might preserve distinct cultural practices, including their formal education systems, while still interacting with individuals from another cultural group inside their daily economic activities. Ultimately, this can involve a cultural ghettoization that is not necessarily politically mandated, but nevertheless relates to a sharp economic and social inequality between the cultural groups. Such inequality also extends more politicized processes of segregation, with laws that maintain distinct civil rights for different groups based on race, ethnicity, or religion. We can see this particularly in pre-1970s America, within Nazi Germany, within apartheid South Africa, and Israel. While separation has been promoted as a means of avoiding the loss of cultural identity associated with assimilation, these segregationist approaches to acculturation have contributed to ongoing political conflicts around the world. So the acculturative process outcomes of assimilation and separation have been extensively critiqued for contributing to the social, political, and economic inequities. Assimilation and separation have marginalized these disempowered communities and individuals, and they have sustained sectarian violence. Both separation and assimilation have nevertheless continued as a biopolitical outcome through the last 6 centuries of European imperialism, national independence building, and globalized capitalism. Now, at the same time, policymakers overseeing culturally diverse domains of governance have wrestled with how ideals of equality, democracy, and homogeneous identity and universal humanity may be advanced within this sphere. For education, let's now look at what it means for teachers to adopt assimilative or separatist practices. Assimilation and separation have presented particular, pragmatic, and highly politicized purposes for teachers. They can ensure that learners from either one's own or another culture sustain the knowledge of a particular cultural system, so that culture might be continued on by the future generations of that geopolitical environment. The political goals of assimilation and separation further suggest that the particular cultural challenges to be addressed by arts education are the problems associated with achieving cultural maintenance and revival. This goal further suggests that an authoritarian pedagogy might be required to ensure that culture is maintained or revived, because the function of students within this authoritarian pedagogy is to serve an objective purpose as the vessels of cultural knowledge. Now, we know that authoritarian pedagogies have been challenged for debilitating a learner's agency. The assimilative goal of authoritarian pedagogy has also been particularly critiqued for devaluing the knowledge of disempowered cultural communities. Acculturation as a biopolitical phenomenon is in this way, therefore, directly impacted by arts education. Particular forms of cultural interaction are reliant upon the pedagogic purposes, content, and relationships that are presented within an arts education system. Attempts to transform the process of acculturation therefore needs to be aware of the role a teacher plays within an arts education system. And this is why I come into that intersection of transdisciplinary research that I introduced earlier, of why it's so important for us to consider when we're looking at phenomena such as mass forced migration, why we need to also consider the role of the performing arts teacher. Now, I've presented you with some very clear migration data about that. This suggests that our experiences of acculturation will only increase in the coming years. Aligning educational responses with emerging policy approaches to acculturation therefore requires our immediate attention. This is a very urgent problem. Now, the concept of cultural integration means the hybridized construction of an increasingly complex and varied culture. Now, this idea of cultural integration has been advanced within global governance policies as a democratic approach to acculturation. Policymakers and governance bodies around the world have agreed that actually if all of these different people are going to come together, the most democratic way of engaging in this is ways that honor the different cultural values they're bringing. Now, extending from theories of multiculturalism, the process of integrating diverse cultural ideals and practices is valued as a means of fostering more tolerant, pluralist societies in ways that challenge ethnocentric cultural hierarchies. Cultural integration does not require that all formerly separate cultural artifacts and processes need to be blended into a new homogeneous culture. So it's not saying everything now needs to be blended, but the process of cultural integration simply seeks to liberate people involved in the process of acculturation from any sentimental assumptions they might carry regarding the cultural superiority or the geopolitical entitlement of a particular culture. That is, cultural integration helps us stop believing that one culture is inherently better than another, or that one culture has a greater sense of geographic ownership to a place than another culture. Through cultural integration, societies can question the legacies of European cultural imperialism. Cultural integration also challenges the ultra-right imaginings of nationhood that seek to devalue and exclude cross-cultural influences. Cultural integration supports the emergence of inclusive and diverse cultural practices that respond to the needs and interests of an ever-becoming society. That is, cultural integration recognizes that no society is fixed, that we are ever becoming, and that this is a process that can be central to that process, role of being an ever-becoming society. So how does cultural integration relate directly to arts education? And what are the cultural challenges that need to be addressed by this integration mandate? It can feel very comfortable to assume that cultural integration occurs naturally as a result of human curiosity, just in moments of cultural exchange, that we don't really need to do anything except just let it happen. Unfortunately, dominant social frameworks and institutions can maintain a power bias that explicitly or implicitly values one culture over another, impeding, or at least slowing down, effective processes of cultural hybridity. Formal education systems, therefore, have an important role to play in proactively fostering cultural integration. Similarly, non-formal education systems, those which take place in community contexts, have a very important role to play in proactively fostering this cultural integration. Now, this process for arts education involves more than just a placement of cultural products side by side. And here I'm talking about those tokenistic cultural fairs or performance evenings that put dancers of various different parts of the world side by side on stage and are commonly used by schools to evidence their wonderful multicultural identity. The cultural challenges for arts integration involves making marginalized cultures more visible. A more significant challenge emerges, however, when learners seek to engage actively in processes of hybridization. For cultural integration to be activated within schools and community learning contexts, learners need to feel encouraged to sensitively identify points of cultural synergy and contrast. Learners need to feel empowered to make critical decisions about these cultural ideas in ways that lead to more complex manifestations of culture. While the diversification of cultural concepts within formal curricula has opened these possibilities, this diversification has also led to very significant identity dilemmas for teachers. Teachers can feel that they do not have the authority or possibly the inclination to represent and promote such different cultural ideas. My own research into this area began with the stories of dance teachers in non-formal education in Palestine and their experience of hegemonic educational mandates, of assimilation and separation. This research led to the postgraduate research projects that I now supervise, which have sought to understand how dance teachers in Aotearoa in New Zealand address diverse cultural content in the curriculum. This first noted the sense of bewilderment that performing arts teachers can experience when called upon to lead learning into culturally unfamiliar territory. This research also revealed how mainstream performing arts teachers who are navigating this cross-cultural components of the curriculum can very tacitly assume an educational purpose of revival and maintenance, of wanting to keep the heritage as it was when addressing these components. This maintenance and revival pedagogic purpose contributes to questions and doubts regarding their own authority of knowledge as teachers. Research projects that I've been involved in have also revealed how the inclusion of Indigenous cultural content can be hopelessly tokenistic. It has shown the problems that emerge when the cultural learning is decontextualized to fit neoliberal Western paradigms of formal education. These research projects have also challenged Western frameworks of education for neglecting the vibrant and complex Indigenous pedagogical approaches that are used to creativity. Often it's neglected that Indigenous education systems had their own pedagogical approaches to creativity within dance learning. The studies I've been engaged in have looked at this within Polynesia, Uganda, Melanesia, Indigenous Australia, Papua New Guinea, and Aotearoa, New Zealand. Now, collectively, these studies question why the appropriation of dance cultures into the curriculum has involved transferring cultural artifacts as canonical knowledge. That is, why is Indigenous culture, when it's brought into the curriculum or into a formal or a learning environment, taught as a fixed and unmoving cultural artifact? The research projects of these Indigenous postgraduate students that I've been working with challenges the cultural appropriation process that sustains the view that Indigenous cultures are ultimately static and tied to inherited structures that can either resist or yield to the new, but cannot produce it. It could be argued that a lack of scholarship into Indigenous pedagogical approaches on creativity has led to assumptions that maintenance revival is the educational purpose for these Indigenous cultures. This salvage understanding of Indigenous cultural knowledge has also been sustained by the ambiguity of the political purpose of Indigenous culture in the curriculum. Are these diverse cultural products in the curriculum there as a means of achieving assimilation or separation or integration? Now, my research into the teacher's role in addressing cultural integration expanded with colleagues in Scandinavia, which Marja referred to in the Arts Equal project in Finland. We investigated teacher training courses for physical education teachers in Finland in 2016. As Europe at that time was grappling with the largest refugee crisis that it had experienced in almost a century, this issue of acculturation and the role of a teacher within it had become an urgent, a very urgent concern. Now, the PE curriculum had expectations that learners socialize in very physically interactive ways, which can foreground, therefore, very differing cultural expectations of physicality, particularly cultured understandings of gender. In our research, we identified that PE teachers, physical education teachers, were increasingly expected to have to navigate these very significant cultural differences in the classroom. And in doing so, they found very tangible ways that were perhaps not so apparent in less physical and less experiential learning environments. For them, cultural difference became very manifest and very real very immediately. Unfortunately, these PE teachers had received very little preparation in how to effectively manage these cross-cultural interactions. Their teacher training processes generally led them to default practices of cultural assimilation. They generally tried to show how migrant children from very diverse cultural backgrounds should just fit in with the local cultural norms. This assimilative approach to culturally diverse learners is not distinct to Scandinavia. We've also observed it within a PhD study that I supervised of studio dance teachers in rural New Zealand. Across the world, PE, physical and arts and dance teachers can very easily, by default, fall into this assimilative role of saying, well, my job is to help the new migrant child fit into the local culture. Now, look, we can acknowledge the pragmatics of such a teaching approach. It makes sense. It's a very easy approach to fall into, but it is also important to consider the risks that education as assimilation, and particularly performing arts education as assimilation, can pose. How does arts education as assimilation affect the learner's sense of belonging? How does arts education as assimilation affect the teacher's sense of teaching purpose? But fundamentally, how does arts education as assimilation affect the wider community's long-term prospects of becoming a culturally integrated, pluralist, and ever-becoming society? Identifying the prevalence and limitations of assimilation separation as educational purposes and of a cultural maintenance or cultural revival mindset within teaching is an important first step. How much does it happen, and what are the problems of it when it does take place? This can allow us to shift our understanding of what is a cultural challenge towards the challenge of cultural integration, and to advance reflections on the teacher's purpose in addressing cultural integration. So what are the roles of teachers as agents of cultural integration? The role of a teacher as an agent of cultural integration is a relatively new idea, and it contrasts markedly with more traditional educational purposes for a teacher, to assimilate learners into the dominant knowledge practices of a community. To be an agent of cultural integration, the teacher's fundamental role is to recognize and celebrate the diversity in the classroom, and to encourage learners to experiment with this diversity for the purposes of constructing new hybrid cultural forms. As an agent of integration, the content knowledge that a teacher might possess in a particular area, such as dance, music, or drama, might become a less important pedagogic asset. In its place, teachers require a pedagogic competence that enables them to recognize their ethnocentric assumptions and to motivate equitable and collaborative cross-cultural relationships amongst learners. In this sense, the role of a teacher as an agent of integration is more akin to that of a community animateur, someone whose pedagogy is not focused on advancing particular knowledge acquisition, but on using learning as a mechanism for generating ideas that are relevant to a particular community. This hyper-constructivist approach to pedagogy extends arguments that the role of a teacher is not just to impart knowledge, but to stimulate a student's motivation to independently guide their own learning. To be an effective agent of cultural integration, however, teachers require three further competencies. First is an ethnographic disposition that advances cultural relativity and cultural pluralism. Second is a political disposition that can disassemble culture-based power hierarchies. And third is a creative disposition that facilitates the emergence of new and valued cultural forms. Without these deliberate teaching contributions to the learning process, the educational process is at risk of remaining oblivious to the power dynamics of a cultural system. Without these particular teaching contributions, the learning might unwittingly sustain processes of assimilation rather than integration. These three dispositions might be considered, to use Gert Piaster's words, these might be considered the gifts that a teacher gives to learners, providing the educational purpose of the learning environment. So I'm going to discuss these three teaching gifts now to identify their importance for a teacher as an agent of cultural integration. So what is an ethnographic competence for a performing arts teacher? Well, the concept of cultural relativity as a core tenet of contemporary ethnography seeks to challenge universalist and essentialist and evolutionary assumptions regarding culture. That is, it tries to take away the idea that we have a universal, that dance or music or drama are universal art forms, or that they have an essential quality to them that is very particular, that can be taken back to an originary point, or that there's an evolutionary process that different cultures pass through and move from less advanced to more advanced states. In doing so, cultural relativity argues against three beliefs that are common to assimilative and separationist mindsets. That is, that there are common cultural ideals and practices that are shared by everyone, that it challenges the idea that every culture has an authentic essence that must make certain cultural products and processes more true than other cultural products or processes. Cultural relativity also challenges that there's a standard pathway for cultural progress, placing some cultures as more advanced than others on this evolutionary path. So through the paradigm of cultural relativity, a teacher is enabled to recognize the injustice of such assumptions. The teacher can lead challenges as to why some cultural items are being presented as inherently better than others. The teacher can value all cultural items in terms of their relevance to the current community and the environment in which the cultural item is situated. Now, developing this cultural relativity requires continual reflection on subjective biases. This involves a willingness from the teacher to move on from ethnocentric denials and defenses against cultural differences and towards more ethno-relative appreciations and valuing of cultural differences. Now, to advance this cultural relativity among students, teachers also need to be disposed to proactively explore and address students' experiences of inequality within the classroom. So what is a political competence for performing arts teachers? Formal education environments and non-formal education environments are inevitably hierarchical. Within formal education particularly, these are increasingly focused on students gaining personal advantage, fostering an ever-competitive mood amongst learners. This sense of comparative value can be continually reinforced to cohorts of learners explicitly through grades or just implicitly through gestures. As a result, students begin their conversations on culture with each other from very inequitable starting points. Teachers can therefore be required to actively deconstruct any perceived hierarchies amongst learners so as to foster more promotive student relationships. This can involve establishing equitable symmetries of knowledge, status, and actions amongst learners. This establishing of this equality of knowledges is an essential step for students to then equitably collaborate on processes of cultural hybridization. So finally, to activate such cultural hybridization, teachers require a competence in facilitating shared creative processes. What is this creative competence? The creative hybridization of culture can involve a process of what Latour has described as compositionism. Latour explains that compositionism takes up the task of building a common world built from utterly heterogeneous parts that will never make a whole, but at best fragile, reversible, and diversible composite material. That is, it allows things to be brought together not in a way that seeks to blend them into a soup, but allows their diverse differences to be very ever present within that space. Such collectivized approaches to creativity inevitably demands an explicit metacognition of what collaboration actually involves. This explicit metacognition of collaboration allows learners to be aware of how their decision-making can remain shared during processes of cultural ideation. This, in turn, allows cultural pluralism to remain central to the entire creative process. Now, cultural diversity is celebrated within the conceptualization, the generation of new ideas, the composition, and the critical refinement of a new cultural product. In this sense, cultural diversity is not something that's just uncritically pasted onto existing cultural products. Without this capacity to guide cultural pluralism within innovation, teachers might provide students with an awareness of challenges associated with cultural integration, but not enable them to enact and produce hybridized responses. Now, these three competencies, while distinct perhaps from more historic approaches to arts education, nevertheless emphasize why performing arts classroom is an ideal location to engage in processes of cultural integration. Dance, drama, and music classrooms can require a high degree of experiential, sense-based interaction between learners. Dance, drama, and music classrooms provide a structured and educationally purposeful forum in which sharers can share and play with their existing cultural knowledge. These classes foreground the ideals of culture and creativity. These classes emphasize a learner's potency to make innovative, artistic, and aesthetic choices in ways that extend on the cultural choices made by others in current and previous generations. The performing arts are also, perhaps, less politically contentious zones of cultural content than other realms of education, such as history or sociology, or health and language and literature. Teachers of performing arts might therefore be accorded greater flexibility to engage with cultural integration as an educational purpose. Now, in a society that is rapidly acculturating, as we've discussed through this era of forced migration, this presents more than just an opportunity for performing arts teachers, it presents a responsibility to engage in this as a practice, but also to be able to articulate the value of performing arts to other disciplines so that it can fully engage in transdisciplinary research that will address societal challenges like forced mass migration. It might be assumed that the specific competencies that I've outlined here for teachers as agents of integration are just tricks of the trade. They're the kind of attributes that teachers might pick up when they're immersed within that sort of sink or swim world of a culturally complex cohort of learners. This assumption, though, presents significant risks, particularly as governance policies have identified the urgency of these cultural challenges. Therefore, there is an urgent need to address these challenges by research and development of arts education. It could be argued that higher education, tertiary training programs for dance, music, and drama teachers carry that responsibility to purposefully design tertiary curricula to develop these competencies that will enable performing arts teachers to be effective agents of cultural integration. To achieve this, further research is required to more deeply understand what cultural integration might mean within differing art forms and levels and contexts of arts education. Further investigations might also explore effective approaches to motivating current and prospective students, prospective teachers in the performing arts towards such dispositions of cultural relativity, equality, and creative facilitation. Now, this inevitably requires an institutional willingness to adapt and develop curricula in alignment with the global prospect of an increasingly diverse and complex cultural world. That is, universities just have to get with it and realize the students in the next 10 years are going to be radically different than they were 10 years ago. Ultimately, this conceptualization of performing arts teachers as agents of cultural integration is a call that supports the rediscovery of teaching as a distinct and important function within education. I'm going to leave it there because I've probably spoken for a very long time and gone well over the time I was meant to, and to give more time for Q&A, but I hope that's a good start for you, and I'll hand it back over to the moderator of the session.
Thank you so much, Nicholas, for this really thought-provoking talk. You addressed some really complex issues and big wicked problems, as you said. We have about maybe 6-7 minutes for questions and answers, and luckily we will have this talking circle after the break, so you can join us for a longer discussion with Nicholas, because there are so many issues you touched upon. But we can now have, yes.
Just get the good questions or the hard questions in now, because before that talking circle, I'm definitely going to go and have that glass of wine, so my answers won't be so coherent then. So if you want an intelligent answer for anything now, now's the time to ask the question. Sorry to interrupt. Go on, Marilena.
No, please, anyone who, please raise your digital hand if you want to. Oh, there's another question from Joy. How does your work regarding cultural integration connect or not with culturally responsive teaching philosophies? It's in the chat.
Yeah, so culturally responsive teaching philosophies consider what is the culture of the learner and what are their needs in the space. And so certainly cultural responsive pedagogies are a first step in this process. However, it extends beyond the idea that learners and their cultures are static and immovable, and considers they are immersed in societies that are becoming ever more complex. And one of the tools and skills that we as teachers of performing arts can do is help them develop proactively new cultural products. A culturally responsive pedagogy may not necessarily go that far. It will acknowledge the distinct cultural needs and the differences, and a really good first step in that development of that cultural relativity and pluralism. But it extends beyond that to say, how now do we actively facilitate creative interactions amongst very diverse cultural groups in a very culturally diverse classroom? I hope that gives a bit of a response to that.
Any more questions or comments? While you're thinking, I get to raise one issue. You talked about the expanded conceptualization of teacher identity. I would think it actually, it's not only about teacher identity, but really expanding professionalism, and that's a huge question for teacher education, actually. How to prepare teachers for this constantly changing and very challenging future, and face all these kinds of societal and global issues. But maybe that's a huge one. I mean, to discuss that, how it is should be reflected. Yes.
When I say identity, I'm drawing on Gert Biester's idea that identity is comprised of a teacher's purpose, a teacher's the content that they're teaching, and the relationships that a teacher has. And all of those things are very much aligned with, well, what are the professional attributes required of a teacher in order to enact and engage with learners and with the content that they're working with. So yeah, and that's why I'd say that central to addressing this is a movement to what the responsibilities of tertiary education to prepare students to be those types of teachers.
Yeah, thank you.
See, Fabian's got his hand up.
Yes, please, Fabian.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. I just want to say that I think it's great that ICDS5 starts with your presentation to show the range and the horizon of what we are confronted with and the possibilities that we have as teachers of performing arts, of eurythmics. And I had this impulse of standing ovations for this beginning of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fabian. That's very kind. Honestly, I was really worried. I thought I'm going to start it with a real bad downer, talking all about refugees and problems. You say, hey, we're all in a pandemic. We got together to celebrate and party, and you've made us feel blue. But no, that's great. It's really good. Hopefully, this is a provocation you can carry on through the rest of the discussions that you're going to have. Because honestly,
thank you very much.
Thank you. You know, we are on the Titanic. You know, we're playing the violin as it's going down. We can't pretend that the world isn't facing these really, really massive problems. And so as researchers, as very knowledgeable, intellectual, intelligent practitioner people, we need to be very actively, immediately, urgently addressing those issues. We cannot indulge ourselves just on flights of, fancy that we might have that are just related to our own particular interests. So anyway, that's my piece.
Thank you. One more question from Emma shortly, please.
Hi, Nicholas. Thank you so much. I would like to hear a few words from you about cultural appropriation, because I believe many teachers, or me also sometimes, are afraid of doing this in the wrong way, choosing a dance from somewhere or the attributes belonging to someone else and doing it and creating some negative situation for people. You know what I'm talking about.
You know, it's a very fundamental concern within this issue, and it's one that teachers across the world share as soon as they find themselves engaging with cultural content that is not of their own. And one way of addressing this issue of cultural appropriation is considering if my purpose as a teacher is one of assimilation or separation, that is, that I'm there to somehow sustain the authenticity of that cultural item or artifact, then yes, appropriation becomes an issue, because who am I to place that in this space? Central to within the role of being a teacher of as an agent of cultural integration is that it is the learner's responsibility to introduce that material and to effectively enable really equitable platforms in which the learner can do that and extend their own culture, recognizing that most of our learners come into the classroom with a way richer array of cultural influences and capabilities than we can possibly encapsulate ourselves as teachers. And so it's more finding equitable ways of allowing that cultural items to come in from the learner's viewpoint and to then be appreciated, engaged with, and connected with other learners. And I think that presents a very different mandate than the idea of saying, I, as a teacher, am bringing this dance from that other culture over there and teaching it to you, because that then immediately does take on that role of, well, who are you to do that? And what is your purpose and function in doing that? So that's in a nutshell, but it's a huge area. There's whole theses written about that very particular concern. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Nicholas, and thank you, everybody. I think it's time to move on and have a little break. We all need that. Once more, thank you so much, Nicholas. I think this was, as Fabian said, wonderful start for our conference, and to consider all the diverse practices and the diversity in practices, diversity of cultures and diversity of learners. So let's have a break and welcome back to this channel to discuss more with Nicholas Rowe in 20 minutes. Thank you.